What's the difference between spirituality and dopamine detox? Dopamine detox has been trending tremendously in recent days. Many different YouTubers, many different public figures, influencers, they're all embarking on this dopamine detox kind of journey or practice. And it's quite interesting because the idea behind dopamine detox is to reset your dopamine receptors, which have been in some way numbed over the days by instant pleasure activities. So when you're constantly engaging in instant pleasure, such as food, watching different movies, or constantly chasing after instant gratification, the chase is to release dopamine, and that dopamine is constantly coming through or generated, giving you a hit of happiness or short-term satisfaction. But the problem with it is that when you engage in the same activity again, you're going to need a bigger dose of dopamine to get the same level of satisfaction. And so over years, if you really think about it, you eventually get to a point where your receptors are so numb and it becomes difficult to enjoy anything anymore. And so this is where the practice of dopamine detox comes in. For several days, and there are many different forms of this practice, for several days you might disengage with these same activities and you may experience a period of having some withdrawal symptoms because you're compulsively addicted to these activities, so to speak. But after the reset, you are back to ground zero again, to square one. It's okay. You can now enjoy the smaller things in life. Reading a book is now more enjoyable than what it used to be. Previously, when your dopamine receptors are so numb and overexposed to so much instant gratification, sources of dopamine, reading a book is boring. It doesn't work. And so you'd rather watch Netflix or something. And so you can instantly see how the link between dopamine detoxing has to do with productivity. How can I increase my productivity? If I have a business that I'm trying to run, how can I increase my productivity, make more money, and do more of this and do more of that? And so in some ways to reclaim your energy and efforts back into your own control so that you can direct that energy and attention into what you now deem is more appropriate or has a higher return on investment, I guess. Now, the practices in dopamine detox are extremely similar to some of the practices in spirituality. And when we're talking about spirituality is extremely broad, in the sense that these practices are prevalent and very similar across many different traditions, across many different cultures. But the goal in spirituality, when taking part in these practices that involve refraining from certain activities that once again actually also release a lot of instant gratification and can lead to some form of compulsion or addiction, the goal isn't necessarily to be more productive. It's not necessarily to get a higher return on investment from your business or whatever it is that you are engaging in. In fact, it's to create space for a higher level of realization. It's to create space for a higher level of introspection, of meditation. And so, if you've undergone a dopamine detox, and your goal is to be able to introspect or meditate, many people would argue there's not much of a return on investment in that, because I need to make money. I need to get the bag or whatever it is. So you can see that really the difference is the end goal behind these practices. So ultimately, you can argue that dopamine detox practices are very similar to a lot of religious practices. Fasting is huge. Cutting out certain foods. You can very easily see that this is very prevalent in religious and spiritual practices, but now it's adopted in the dopamine detox world. But in essence, the end goal is different. And so when you look at spirituality then, and you undergo a fast, you take part in a fast, yes, the benefits of reclaiming your control back and resetting your dopamine receptors and all of that, these are all part of it, for sure. But really, the underlying goal behind it is to create that space, to create that sense of liberation, and to free yourselves from the shackles of materialism to some extent. Because relying and living just to get dopamine is arguably a highly materialistic way of living. And so this, once again, is another slight difference where dopamine detox very often, and I'm not saying this is in all cases, it's somehow to fuel materialism. It's somehow to fuel the identity that is chasing after worldly goals in some sense. And there is nothing wrong with that. But it's nice to see that there is actually a distinguishment. So spirituality, the practices behind spirituality are actually going in the opposite direction in regards to identity. So if dopamine detox is a practice to chase after the goals or to achieve the goals that the identity has cultivated and set out, and whenever the identity sets out goals, it's almost always shackled within the materialistic bounds of reality. Whereas spirituality, it's actually the opposite. These, if you like, dopamine detox or spiritual practices are there to not strengthen the identity and its goals and to create a platform so that you may achieve those goals. It's actually kind of the opposite. It's to dissolve the identity. It's to clean the dusty outline of the identity so that you can see its transparency. And you can see that the identity isn't really the center of the universe. It's not about cultivating the identity. It's about dissolving the identity so that now you are able to experience outside of the bounds and the lens of the identity alone. In other words, the ego. When I mention identity, the other word for it is the ego. And so spirituality is a path to create space. And that's what I mean with space, to dissolve the notion that you are the center of the universe. And so that's also the reason why spirituality also has other practices, such as, and when I say spirituality, most religions and cultures, they have other practices that also involve compassion, so helping those in need. Because as you extend your efforts out to help those in need, knowing that you're not going to get anything in return, so i.e. there's a very low return on investment, materialistically speaking, what it actually does is you're giving yourself up, you're giving yourself away. And this is the path of selflessness. This is the power of compassion. And so as you open up this space within you, as there's a dissolution of the identity. The identity becomes more transparent. You see it for what it really is, which is just an accumulation of ideas and thoughts and memories over the years. There's a very deep sense of liberation and peace that will not manifest itself, but bring itself out, because that peace and liberation is always there. It's the strengthening of the identity that actually takes away that peace. And so this is actually sometimes a side effect of dopamine detox practices. So if you are someone who's taking part in a dopamine detox, you've gone 2 days of doing this fast where you're limiting your food, you're not eating any food, you're only drinking water, you're not engaging in any sort of electronic activities, you're not listening to music, you're not doing anything. And being okay with not doing anything actually kind of dissolves the constant desires. It loosens up the constant desires of wanting to eat this and wanting to do this and wanting to watch this. And so it might actually also lead you to a place where there's a sense of transparency of the ego or the identity that is recognized. And so this can also lead to peace and freedom. So ultimately then, even though the intention or the initial motivation of why people may engage in dopamine detox fasts and why people engage in spirituality and practices, even though the initial motivation and intention may differ, the results can be very similar, and can actually have very similar goals or similar outcomes anyway. So I thought I'd speak about this because I feel like there's this distinguishment where if you are taking part in spiritual practices, and it's not to improve your productivity, then actually it's pointless. Or there's something against taking part in spiritual practices at times, when actually, if you look at the encouragement of this highly productive entrepreneurial world, it's all about waking up early in the morning, meditating, and then intermittent fasting, and then taking part in these routines. And these are all actually practices that people have been taking part in for thousands of years, and have existed for thousands of years. So really, it's all kind of the same thing. Okay, maybe the initial intention is different, but in essence, it can lead to the same and a very similar outcome at the very least. So I hope this breakdown has been somewhat interesting to you. Don't hesitate to look at some of the other videos. This is Hassan from the Spiritual Walks, and we are all on a journey towards the truth.